Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Shadia Rafage from Vet Triage, and we have the incredible honor today of being with Dr. Jennifer Scarlett from the San Francisco SPCA. Dr. Scarlett, how are you?
I'm well. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this should be a lot of fun. Obviously, the rescue shelter world is massive, of course, and it's in especially since the pandemic. We know the adoptions went up. There's a veterinary crisis. You guys are in a really unique position because of you have a clinical setting as well as a rescue setting. So, do you want to get folks up to speed on kind of in general what your facility or organization does in the San Francisco area?
I would, and I don't know if there is a chat function, but if folks could just write in if they have a rescue animal they got from a shelter, no problem if you got it from a breeder, but just curious to know.
Uh,
Um, but the San Francisco SPCA is a little bit unusual in that we're more of a veterinary facility than a shelter. We're known for our sheltering work and sort of being the um, really the, I guess, ground zero for the no-kill movement. But actually, more than half of our staff is here to provide veterinary care, both full service and high volume spay neuter and community clinics. So, um, yeah, and that's what we have focused on as a traditional shelter. We've let go of some great programs to focus on veterinary medicine, and not only for the public but also in the shelters.
and even as a veterinarian myself, I tend to get somewhat, I guess, confused as the definition of no kill. Obviously, it sounds great. What essentially does that mean?
So no kill is a term that arguably is probably the first was the first real call to action in sheltering. And this happened in the mid 80s, 90s. Shelters were like, we just want to be more than a place where you drop off your animal and it's euthanized. And if we think about the statistics, in the 70s and 80s, over 30 million animals were euthanized in shelters across the nation every year. And now we have less than 8 million animals entering shelters. But it took more than just advocates for no kill to get it going. And no kill is just an arbitrary number that if you get over 90% of the animals out of your shelter alive that came in, then you're deemed no kill. So it's completely arbitrary. And if you think about it, if your hospital was no kill, it was only 90% of your animals left alive. It's not so great. But no kill is it's also fractured the sheltering community quite a bit because for many years it became this, oh, you're kill, you're no kill. And hopefully a lot of that has quieted down because no kill means that we're not going to euthanize an animal because of space. But we will euthanize an animal if it has suffering and we can't help them with that, if it has conditions that are dangerous to other animals in the community or to people. So it doesn't mean that no animals are euthanized. It means that it's a very thoughtful decision based on the animal's welfare.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I did notice even peripherally as a boarded surgeon, not being in the rescue world directly for most of my career, that there always did seem to be this sort of judgment or separation between facilities that had that title and didn't. And I always thought, well, that's weird because everybody should be pro no kill. That sounds like the way to go. And so why are we fragmented like this? So it's
Yeah.
yeah, I see that. I see that. So then I presume, of course, naturally, then the fosters are probably really, really integral to trying to maintain the no kill status.
Yeah. It is, one of the things that no kill did is there was so much pressure on shelters to reach this 90% number that many shelters, and this is probably 10, 15 years ago, and they occasionally will see this happen, begin to not make decision on animals. In other words, they put them in cages for long periods of time and they suffer. So that's where the tension started. And you mentioned foster because foster is this amazing tool for shelters to use, foster and managed intake. So for many years, shelters were just open door, just drop off your animal and, we'll just take it. And the problem with that is you have to make an appointment to get, well, maybe you don't have to make an appointment to get your haircut, but most people have to make an appointment to get their haircut. Sorry.
These locks. Thank you for noticing.
Yeah. But it's kind of crazy, like, that for many shelters, you can just drop off your animal. And maybe that shelter has the capacity to care for them and the space, and maybe it doesn't. And there is this huge movement now to not only use fosters to get animals into homes and out of the shelter and to safety, but also to say, hey, wait a minute, why don't you make an appointment? Unless this is an emergency, you hang on to this animal and we'll take it when we can appropriately care for them. So it's called managed intake. And so it's these basic tools that move shelters from just a depository for bad decisions or no decisions to really being a resource in communities.
Yeah, that's really wild, and that does make sense. And I can imagine that by the bottleneck for folks who are just dropping pets off ends up happening with this space and staff that you have available. So it would make sense to say, okay, sure, we'll take your pet in. We're going to do what we can to find a new home, or take care of them, or whatever's necessary. But we need to figure out the intake, the rate of intake, and that does make sense. And that's why I imagine that probably did end up with quite a beneficial outcome, at least to some degree.
Oh yeah, can you imagine running a hospital where you just had no control over what walked in? And of course you want to be there for the emergencies, but to do that, you're going to have to create some appointments and way to control your day.
Yeah.
The other big thing about no kill is, it was, in my view, the first aspirational call, but very little progress was made until the veterinary movement stepped in to help and pair up with shelter advocates. And when that happened, and it started with the first shelter program at UC Davis, he started to get protocols and biosecurity and a method to keep animals well and to keep them moving through, along with high volume spay neuter. And as we think about this veterinary shortage, shelters are not immune. And if we decouple the impact that veterinarians have had on shelters, then we're looking down the pike of going backwards on a lot of the welfare and good outcomes that we've had in shelters.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Absolutely. Right. Well, and so that brings us then to some degree to your clinical work. Most folks, including myself, have thought that shelters and rescues, that's what they do, and the clinics is a separate ordeal. And we've seen now, at least in my experience of the past maybe 10 years now, where shelters, through whatever funding is available to them, have expanded to say we're going to also provide clinical help, access to care. And that's really cool that you folks in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, do that as well. What caliber of cases are you guys able to manage from a clinical setting? Can you handle things that are fairly complex? I mean, how sick are the pets? I know there are a lot of hospitals in the area, but of course they have the same veterinary shortage issues that we all do. They're congested as well. So to what degree are you guys able to take care of pets on that front?
Yeah. Well, we partner with the San Francisco Animal Care and Control, but most of our animals come through partnerships in Central Valley. And recently, and anybody can access it, there's a veterinary care accessibility map that was just produced. It's by a cohort of animal welfare groups. And it looks at the nation and the degree in which people and communities can access care, number of veterinarians. It's based on 5 social index factors. And so if you look at the Central Valley of California, the ability for people to access care is very, very low. And that translates to what happens in shelters. So most of the animals we get from Central Valley, many of the animals have fractures. They've been hit by a car, pellet injuries, illnesses. And our shelter medicine team is able to do fairly complex surgeries, orthopedic surgeries, different medical procedures to get them to wellness.
Yeah.
But the key is going to be, how do we prevent those animals from going in the shelter in the first place? And that's, if you think about transferring animals from shelters, we call them from source shelters to destination shelters. Mm. It's poor areas to wealthier areas. And it brings up questions around, I know it's a phrase that is used a lot, about social justice. In other words, a lot of it is based on just transferring animals rather than trying to keep them in the home that they already have. And for the most part, the best home for an animal is the one that it's in. And so anytime someone gives up an animal, it doesn't matter if they're rich or poor, there's some heartbreak involved.
Sure.
So the goal is, let's keep them in their homes. And so you'll see more and more shelters beginning to build public clinics in order to do that.
That's fantastic. Yes, yeah, and we know, of course, from Vet Triage, trying to find a more unique way to increase access to care. The same idea holds. If we can increase access to care for folks, make it easier for them to consult with veterinarians and get the care they need, whether it's remotely or in a brick and mortar facility, that we can hopefully keep those pets in those homes.
Yeah.
It's sad, especially if you have a problem with a pet that's fixable, that's
Yeah.
curable. It's sad to see that because of lack of access, that pet owner feels as though they have no other option but to abandon, forfeit the pet. And so that's a problem, obviously, and that's been a problem. And of course, we know that during the pandemic, that problem, it was accelerated.
Yeah. Well, that's why we love Vet Triage, not only for our clients at our public clinics, but for the potential. I mean, the work that you're doing is opening up all kinds of possibilities and ideas in the sheltering community about, like, could we use something like this to help out shelters?
Thank you. Yeah, we were just actually at the expo in Florida, and it was all rescue organizations there, and we've got a very positive response. And so we do help for folks who don't already know about Vet Triage. We on the rescue and foster side of things, the shelter side of things, the goal is to try and, if we can, increase access to care, obviously, but also help save money. If every time there's a medical problem with a pet that's being fostered, if you're sending that pet to the emergency room every single time, whether it's a benign condition or a more severe one, that costs something. So Vet Triage provides a low cost option to be able to try and triage those pets that are being cared for by the foster parent. And we find over 80% are not emergencies. And so if we can stop that process from sending everything to the emergency room, not only does it eliminate the stress of travel to the foster parent and the pet at 3 o'clock in the morning, the expense associated with travel, the wait time at the emergency room, the cost at the emergency hospital, and then to find out that this probably could have been handled at home with some basic measures, we could have saved all that. It increases funding back to the facility, and then of course you can save more lives by using that money you've saved. And so we found that we've saved organizations hundreds to thousands a month, depending on how big they are, by utilizing our services. So it's been quite inspirational on our end, and we just see it moving in a positive direction. We're spearheading the movement in telemedicine in terms of teletriage.
Yeah.
So thank you for the feedback. Yeah, we're
Yeah.
glad to do it.
You know, you're so unique as a boarded surgeon, and then also, starting Vet Triage, which serves just about everything that under the sun, depending on who dials up. I'm just curious, if you were to have a crystal ball in front of you, what do you think veterinary medicine looks like in 10 years?
It'll end up being what I've been calling the hybrid model. It'll be a scenario where you have a brick and mortar that operates as an urgent care. They offer diagnostics. They can hospitalize to some degree, but really they're meant for more outpatient therapies, for those cases that warrant that level of care. The way you figure out what cases warrant that level of care is you triage them with telemedicine. So the pet owner is at home or wherever they're at. They're not in the facility. They're at home, and they dial up, Vet Triage. They are triaged by a veterinarian and deemed, is this appropriate for an urgent care setting? If so, we think your pet is afflicted with this condition. You need this medication or medications. Let's get you to the nearest urgent care. We found one 5 miles from you. Head on over. You'll meet with the staff there. The staff there can then provide a let's call it maybe a additional or a follow-up physical exam to make sure that everything else is okay, because obviously virtually we're limited. But essentially, as long as everything pans out for that pet and that client, here's your treatment.
Mm-hmm.
Head on out, and we'll see you for a recheck in a couple of weeks or whatever it may be. It has to be that. That's the hybrid model. That's where you prevent an urgent care in the veterinary field from turning into a general practice or an emergency hospital, because that's been done and they're congested. And that also is a way to increase access to care without creating that same bottleneck. And that's what I call the hybrid model. And I've already utilized that prior in my career, and it works very, very well if you're doing it ethically, meaning you are using it for the appropriate cases. The pet owner understands the pros and cons of this method. Then it can be done really successfully. So that's what I think the future is going to be. It's going to be a hybrid model, and it's moving in that direction. I already know folks who are starting urgent care type settings. My fear is that without incorporating telemedicine, it's going to turn into just another general practice or emergency clinic, which sure, we need more of those, but they're going to end up with the same problems we've been seeing for the past 10 years plus, and accelerated with the pandemic.
Yeah. Well, I was just reading a new paper by Kate Hurley, who runs the UC Davis Shelter Medicine Program. Let me just read you the title: The Evolving Role of Triage and Appointment-Based Admissions to Improve Service, Care, and Outcomes in Animal Shelters. And in it, she's talking about using telehealth as that screening mechanism. Like, okay, you need to come in. You can come in on Wednesday, or you need to come in now, or here's some resources with that rude, jumpy, mouthy dog to settle them down and keep them forever. So,
absolutely. And Vet Triage has been doing this since the end of 2019. We've been at this, and the doctors that I hire have to be of certain experience, certain caliber to be able to do this effectively. You need doctors who have seen case A many, many times in their career to be able to actually on video figure out the same scenario. And there's a finesse to it. You have to utilize the technology you have at hand, the technological skill set of that pet owner. And how do you examine a pet from a distance? By using the client's hands, right? How do you direct that? There's a lot of nuance there, and it's not as simple as just FaceTiming a pet owner and let's figure this out. There's a lot involved, and that's part of our training with Vet Triage is to try and improve the veterinarian skill set. They're already experienced in the brick and mortar setting, but how can we take that valuable experience, their wisdom, and translate it to a video call to make it effective? So there's a lot more involved than just saying, oh, we'll just use it. There's a lot, and so we're very proud of the work that we've done, and I'm glad that kind of literature is coming out now.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't a telehealth course at a vet school in the near future, if there isn't already.
If any academic institutions are listening and they are interested in doing that, more than happy. I'm happy to educate the students there and the staff, either via video or going there in person, because that is going to happen. That is going to happen. It's going to end up being there's going to end up being courses in academia. There already are some. I think Texas A&M started.
That was green there.
And there's going to be more to that. Absolutely. We have Bill Johnson here comments, when it comes to adoptions, especially what we've seen over the last few years, do you ever categorize potential adoption parents as high risk if you think they may end up giving the animal back? I fear a lot of adoptions the last few years have been emotionally driven from loneliness, and they may not have realized the commitment that it takes to be a long-term pet parent.
Yeah, so that was a lot of fear going into all of the adoptions in the pandemic, but it has not been shown to be true. We've been monitoring our surrender and return rates and in conversation with colleagues. And because here's the thing is people fall in love. And we even do something called holiday windows, which is down at the Macy's windows downtown here. We put kittens in the window, shoppers come by, and we get this question from the public every year, like, the return rate must be awful because people are doing this on impulse. Mm-hmm. But there have been so many times where I've been at a meeting or something, and I'll ask people, like, how many of you acquired an animal on impulse? You saw it by the side of the road, you da-da-da, and many hands will go up. And the return rate isn't higher because people fall in love and they're willing to change their lives and make that commitment. Where we see return rates go up is more associated with economic decline. So the Great Recession of 2008, on what is on everybody's mind is, if evictions go up, we'll see people give up their animals. So there is this big change in the world around, especially in the United States, that, just to give them up usually doesn't happen. It's usually there's some crisis going on. And that's what shelters should be here for, is when the safety net, we are the last safety net, but we want to be the last safety net. We want to have community clinics, support to help you with the training. But if you need us, we will be here.
Yeah, I think it's a mistake to assume that all relinquished pets, animals, the are the outcome of malice.
Right.
I think most folks really, once they're at that point, they truly do see it as a last resort. They have no other option but to relinquish this pet. I don't think it's out of malice. Sure, there's bad people out there. Of course, there's maliciousness, that all that occurs. But it does seem that most people, it's the last resort. They just have no other choice. It's a choice between being able to maintain the livelihood of that pet versus their own family and rent and gas, and so it becomes an issue. I always, when clients at the brick and mortar as a boarded surgeon used to display these concerns regarding finances, I always suggested try to have $5,000 set aside just for your pet in case of emergency. Most emergencies are maybe a few $100s. You have some big ones where you have a paralyzed pet or a stomach that's twisted, and now you're looking at 5,000 plus. You want to have something set aside as a security net. And if you're not everybody can do that, but if you're able to, I would say 5,000 is a pretty good actual amount to have set aside for your pet's emergency if it comes down to it.
Yeah, and I want to go back to Bill's question and just a little bit more information about returns. For our shelter, and this probably holds true for many shelters, about 8% of animals are returned within the first 3 days. So they take them home, they're like, oh my God, he's chewing on everything, I can't deal with this. And they bring them back. And we actually encourage people, if it's not a right fit, or if your animal at home is not accepting of the new pet, or there's go ahead and bring them back. Because for us as a shelter, we've gotten some more information about the animal and we can help it find the right home. And if folks are really that overwhelmed in the first couple of days, totally fine. Take a break, bring it back, and we'll find another home. But we do offer support. So we offer a hotline if they want some training help, or our behavior team will step in if they want to work through it.
That's great to hear. I have also heard in the past that the security measures for adoption was almost too impractical. It was like adopting a human child, to the point where they're screening your entire life and evaluating your home environment before you can adopt this pet. And I thought, boy, that I understand the good nature behind that, but that almost seems as though we're becoming you're becoming your own barrier to getting pets into homes. So although you don't want to necessarily give pets away necessarily, you also can't have too many stipulations, or else.
Yeah, I mean, the irony of that is, for many years, when shelters were euthanizing over 50% of the animals that came in, is when the industry had the most stringent adoption practices, like, oh yeah, we're going to do a home visit and all these other things. And then about 15 years ago, there was a movement for open adoptions. And to your point around, most people want to do the right thing. And so with open adoptions, it becomes a conversation. And unless there are truly red flags that come up in that conversation, most people will figure it out. And we have to trust that humans, for the most part, are okay. And it's much better for an animal to be in a home than in a shelter. Even our shelter, which is beautiful, it's modern, we have awesome volunteers taking them out. It is still an institution, and it's still stressful. And so the faster we can get them out into a home, the better off they are.
Absolutely, yeah, I couldn't agree more. So where do you see your organization heading? Both on the clinical side and the rescue side. How do you guys visualize yourself in 5 years, 10 years plus? I know your staff, from communicating with them myself, they're fantastic. I mean, they are responsive. They're so sweet on phone calls or emails. Where do you see yourself in the next few years with the facility, both on the clinical side and the rescue side?
We're merging them. in that our vision is to make access to care available for everyone in San Francisco and as far as the reach as we possibly can. And we're going to do it through a couple different ways. One is through public policy. There are so many barriers to expanding access to care and having a strategy to combat this severe shortage that we're in. One of them is a telemedicine lawsuit to make it much more, I guess, of an opportunity to the veterinary field. The second is with our shelter, or with our veterinary operations. So we have a large facility here on the Mission campus, and we're starting the first low-cost community clinic. So thinking about how do we change the operations in in veterinary medicine to serve the most people. So we're looking at creating a community clinic. We've been piloting it now for a couple of years that takes the learning from high volume spay, neuter, and sheltering. Like, we're not going to do everything. We're going to do these modules of care, do a lot of it, be much more efficient, and keep the price as low as possible. Use our full service hospital for those urgent emergency, they absolutely have to come in. So kind of following the human care model in that regard. When we win a lawsuit, opening up more of a telemedicine platform for people. And then connecting that with the shelter. We'll always have an adoption center, but really our goal is to keep animals from coming in. And so what we've done with one county in Central Valley is added a spay neuter clinic next to the shelter. And so everything that we can scale and share with our partners, the community clinic, high volume spay neuter, that's what we want to do. So it's that combination of the direct care piece influencing what we do in public policy, and then public policy opening up opportunities to expand the direct care.
That's great. And as you already know, I'm happy to support your endeavors as much as possible. That Triage is all in to help your folks out. Absolutely. It's long overdue, I would say, for changes in policy, both from a legal side and from like a medical board side. They're quite antiquated. They need to be updated, and we're trying to fight that good fight. Not just, of course, in California, but in North America. We're trying to do this. So I think it's great. Do you think there's something specific about the Bay Area in particular that makes access to care more challenging, or do you hear similar challenges occurring across the U.S.?
Well, what's interesting is when I look at that veterinary care accessibility map, San Francisco scores pretty low. The scale is 0 to 100. The counties around us, they're up there in the 80s, 90s for access to care. San Francisco is sitting right at 50. And then the counties in Central Valley are down at 11, 12. And the reason for that, I think, is based on what I read in the report, is the cost of living here is so high.
Yeah.
The number of veterinarians, and we have this disparity. So, for example, where we're putting the community clinic, it's a veterinary desert here in a city that's only 7 by 7 and one of the wealthiest in the country. And so we will see this disparity grow not only in San Francisco, but nationally with this shortage. I think it's predicted that somewhere around, we're at a shortage of 3,500 to 5,000 veterinarians nationally today. And that's set to grow to 14,000 in 10 years if we keep on doing nothing. And so I think, to your point, I think a lot of us have to lock arms and really put a lot of pressure to allow for RVTs or an extender position within our field, to open it up to more diversity and to use technology and change the way we operate. Because otherwise, the 90 million animals that are not receiving enough care today is only going to grow by another 75 to 80 million animals at this rate.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, RVT is registered veterinary technician, the equivalent for us as nurses. And some of us are advocating for having RVTs or LVTs, licensed veterinary technicians, having their position elevated with whatever guidelines we want, so that they don't play the role of a doctor, but they are above what a RVT or LVT is currently allowed to do. And we feel as though if you can elevate their position similar to a physician's assistant in the human side, PAs, that we can increase access to care that way. Not every single pet with trauma or an illness has to go through a veterinarian. Perhaps certain cases can go through this elevated RVT or LVT position. And that's one method we can try to utilize to increase access to care. We've got a veterinarian shortage nationwide. It's been going on for some time now, and I'm not so sure we're taking the right steps as a field to improve that. And so one method to try and at least alleviate that burden is to elevate the LVTs to another level. So that's I think what you're referring to there, and I'm on board for that as well. Our veterinary technicians are remarkable. They run this, and they are driven by passion wholeheartedly, and they're fatigued. They've been fatigued because we work them, and they work long hours. It's an emotional day at any veterinary clinic. We all know this, and so if we can utilize their passion and skill set to give them more responsibility in terms of what I'm referring to as this elevated position, I think it's going to be good for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Necessity is the mother of invention. So I think it'll be an inventive decade to see how we can figure this out.
Absolutely. We have the highest number of veterinary schools in our history in the field, where veterinary applicants went up over 10% during the pandemic, whereas years beforehand, it's maybe 5 or 6% increase every year. It almost tripled during the pandemic. We are pumping out the largest number of veterinary students per year in the field of veterinary medicine, and yet we can't seem to find veterinarians to hire. So I'm not so sure we'll have a profession left in a decade if we don't fix something. There's going to be no veterinarians left. The folks who graduated, with me and beyond before, they're at some point thinking about retiring, and we're not replacing them fast enough with new graduates. So we need to do something. And so necessity, to say the least, is definitely what's driving this.
Yeah. And diversity, it's a profession that many vet schools are in land grant universities, and they tend to be rural, and it's expensive, and that has culminated in a profession that is overwhelmingly white. And I think that we also have a great opportunity to diversify our profession, and that'll only make it healthier. So.
Absolutely, the more individuals you can bring to the table that have a different point of view, not just in veterinary medicine, but in life in general, the more we're going to be able to think outside the box, creative solutions to fix these massive challenges that we're facing. Absolutely, boy. One final question for you. I'm sort of new to the phrase kitten season, and I know anybody in the rescue world they're not new to that phrase. When is kitten season, and what does that actually pertain to?
Well, cats go into heat. They're seasonally polyestrous. On the West Coast, we have what we call a biphasic kitten season. So they're just ripening on the vine right now. So we'll see them pop up in May, June. Then we'll have a quiet, end of summer, and then around November we'll have a second kitten season. So that's what we're actually. It hasn't been too bad this year. High volume spay neuter has really helped us a lot in decreasing the number of orphan kittens. And I think on the East Coast it's just one big summer mound of kittens. But yeah, it follows their estrus pattern. But
that's wild. Yeah, that's wild. And we certainly on Vet Triage, we definitely see that elevation as well with the shelters we work with, the rescues we work with. We see an influx of kitten cases 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and then it dies down when there's a lull. And so it mirrors that. But it's a phrase that I've been introduced to me over the past couple of years since Vet Triage, and figured I'd have an experienced doctor elaborate on that. So thank you for that explanation.
Sure.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to put out there to the world with this
This has been fun. No, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for the questions and the comments here. I'm glad I see some rescue animals out there. So thank you guys for adopting. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the work that you do and your entire staff. Please thank them. We know it's hard work, and it's making a massive difference. So thank you for the work that you do. And thanks everybody for tuning in and for your questions and comments. And feel free to share this. We'll talk to you guys on the next one.
All right.
Thank you, Scarlett. Bye-bye.